Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello and welcome. The course is Appreciating and Writing Popular English Non-Fiction Books. This is lecture 9, where we talk about preparing a manuscript, writing, editing and publishing. With the last few lectures, we have talked a lot about reading non-fiction books. We have met many non-fiction writers, seen many non-fiction titles, and we are now reaching sort of the last few lectures. We have talked also about craft. We have, in fact, over the last few lectures, been talking about thinking up ideas for writing non-fiction books and how to go about research. And we've talked about form and structure and style. And after all this, we've now coming to, of course, the most important aspect of non-fiction or any kind of all books, in fact, which is the writing itself. So now we are at the point where, after all this thinking and planning, we are finally at the point where we begin writing the manuscript. Finally. So let's begin. This is a very well-known series of interviews conducted by the Paris Review with writers talking about their lives and how they work. I am kind of fascinated by the many different ways in which writers work, the insights into processes and writers' kind of very different styles of working. So I thought one way of getting into this particular stage of our journey with nonfiction, we could kind of dive right into it and see how writers work. Writers are very sensitive people. They spend very long and lonely hours doing this work of writing. And so let's see where they work. I mean, I think this is the first thing that one could actually look at, which is the rooms which the writers work in. So here is James Baldwin, novelist and playwright known for his many works, including his essay collection, Notes of a Native Son at Work. Have a look. This is a kind of a writer from a slightly older era. You see a typewriter and you see the concentration on his face. You see a certain air of relaxation, but of course a kind of focus on, and there's paper and a typewriter, as I said, which is not something that one often sees these days. Here is another writer, George Bernard Shaw, writer of plays, writer of prose. Here he is in a shed where he finds that he has a very good light to work in. Another writer, a more recent, a more modern writer, David Lodge. Here is a slightly sort of a room with a kind of odd shape, which is something that I kind of like a lot. Windows, a lot of light coming in. He sort of he's described the furniture in the room. He says the desk surface tilts if you want it to. And if you look at the chair, which looks forbidding, almost like an electric chair, but it's ergonomically kind of shaped, because that's important because you have to spend many hours at work. Here is the writer Joyce Carol Oates. This is a sort of tidy but personal study, and this is on the second floor of her home. She's sort of seated near a window which she likes to gaze out of. You can see right now it's winter and the trees are bare, no leaves. but very, very beautiful. I can imagine quite inspiring. The writer J.K. Rowling, the author of the famous Harry Potter series, was looking, apparently, when she was trying to finish the last book in the series, was looking for a quiet place to write and found herself at the Balmoral Hotel in Edinburgh and checked in. And the writing went so well that apparently she kind of wrote the whole book there. I believe Arthur C. Clarke, another well known writer, has written from a hospital bed. Another writer, Mona Simpson, said that for one of her books, she wanted to be watched while writing, so she wrote the whole book in a public library. So it's just fascinating, the kind of wide range of spaces in which writers write, and different writers find inspiration, perhaps for one particular book, or perhaps for for always. But the variety, the range is kind of fascinating. Again, you kind of look around, and when you read how writers write and where they kind of find their inspiration, you would think just looking from the outside, one would think that writers would like many things, let's say silence, for instance. And yet, the writer Roddy Doyle claims to be inspired by the sounds that come up to his attic study. The sound of children laughing, the sound of construction workers, sirens. So that's a kind of very different approach. Um, Again, you would think that writers might like a bright, uncluttered space, but not necessarily true. Here is a writer, Douglas Copeland, who actually painted his study black. And he said that, he thought that it would be forbidding, but instead he said that it became kind of a warmer space. And on the shelves, he has these sort of architectural models and shapes derived from building kits. And he says, when I'm writing, I like to look at them to cleanse the palate of my brain. That's a lovely phrase in itself, cleanse the palate of my brain. Writing takes place in time, while objects take place in space, and entering space for a few seconds helps me mentally change gears. I'm a visual thinker, but most writers are not. Writing in a big empty room would give me the bends. I need density around me. Again, another lovely phrase, very writerly phrase. I need density around me. Again, you would think that writers are stationary. In fact, what we have seen in just now in all these photographs is a chair. That's the kind of course, the common element everywhere, that there is a chair and writers have to sit to write in a chair. But again, not necessarily true. Colson Whitehead, another wonderful writer, keeps moving around. He says 100 pages in the dining room, 100 pages in the living room while the kids at school. It adds up. For the first half of a new book, maybe you want your back against the wall, gunslinger style. Nothing can sneak up on you except your own bad sentences. Try it. Then there are all the rituals. Gabriel Garcia Marquez, great novelist, apparently used many typewriters. Philip Roth uses standing desks. So I guess he kind of stands, and that's another kind of focus that you would get from that. Then there are the timings. Different people use write at different times. So Baldwin, who we saw earlier, he had a day job. So he used to write in the night when his children were asleep, and it was quiet. And so even when he made a name for himself and could leave the day job and write full time, he still chose to write at night. I guess he got used to that. Charles Dickens, famous great novelist, he had a specific routine. He used to wake up at 7 and then start work at 9 and work till 2. Then he would have lunch with the family, and then go on a 3-hour long walk. So it's kind of very, very different things that work for different people. There is no one way to write in simple terms, but whichever kind of room you choose to write in, whether it's bright and airy, whether it's large, whether it's small, whether it's noisy, whether it's quiet, the distractions are really kind of internal, and that's what one struggles with the most. So what are the problems? Usually distractions, always, right? Always it's tempting to do something else. Always there is a kind of sound that makes you think of something else. The mind plays trick constantly. And these days, of course, with the internet always sort of active, there is that email that comes in, or a phone call, or a flash, a piece of news that runs across the screen, and constantly one is tempted to leave the page and go somewhere else in the mind, or go somewhere else actually to kind of answer an email before you go on to the next paragraph, and so on and so forth. And there is writer's block. I mean, it's something we all struggle with. Some days the writing just isn't going well. Or sometimes, you've just written brilliantly, and then that's it. Nothing comes to mind. There's just this wall, or this blank page, increasingly terrifying you because you don't know how to fill it. And it can be that just the day before everything went fabulously well, and suddenly it's going really badly. So that's true for everyone. Writer's block, whatever you call it, it's a real thing. It's there. Um, it's there. The sudden drying up of ideas, the sudden drying up of words, the sudden feeling that why is one doing this? One never had to do it in the first place, and one is no good at it. Well, that's true for everyone. Dejection, as I said, this feeling of this feeling that one can't really do this, the feeling that the feeling that one has failed, the feeling that one really doesn't know how to do this. Then there is restlessness. Suddenly one is tempted to fidget, like I'm feeling right now, the need to move my hands, the need to look here, look there, do anything, get up, walk around, go out, go down, leave the room, go for a walk, go for a run, pick up the phone, talk to someone, just not be here, just not be doing this. Well, the good thing to know is that this happens to all writers, that you won't be a writer if these things did not happen to you. We are not robots, we are not machines. There is no assembly line coming through us with the words, supplying the words with that great ease. No, writing is a struggle. Writing is a battle. And all these things are part of that struggle. There are days when things will not go well. There are times when the words will not come. There are times when the ideas will seem completely crazy and stupid and worthless, when just the previous day they seemed so fantastic and original. One will suddenly not be able to be still, will want to move, and will want to kind of take one's mind off what one is supposed to be doing. And distractions, sometimes, yes, they will come, and one will want to give in to the temptation to be thinking about something else. But the good news is that that moment passes. That moment will pass, the ideas will flow again, the words will come again to mind, One will find new ways of saying things, new, wonderful, exciting ways. And even if they're not so exciting, the words will come enough to get you from this point to the next point and the next stage. And it will happen. One will move on. But the important thing is to stay there, to keep at it, to not give in to dejection, to not give in to feelings of worthlessness, to not give in to the feeling that one can't do this. Just stay there, just stay put. Stay there, know that this will wash over one and move on, and things will change and one will get on with the work. So that's what one has to keep in mind. You have to just plow through the obstructions that crop up. If you see writers, if you see all writers, and in fact we've just seen a few writers at work, what you notice is that it's like, in some ways, it's like anything. You have to show up for the work. They're there sitting on their chairs or standing up or um, moving around the room, but they're there. They're there like any other kind of worker. They're there hammering out the words. They know that they have to kind of be in that space and in that sort of frame of mind where they know that they're working. So day after day, in fact, uh, they kind of come to their study or wherever they write. Some people don't even move out of their bedrooms, and they kind of write in bed, or whatever works, whatever method works for you. But the important thing is to work. Writers are often, seen as dreamy, abstracted individuals, and in fact, sure they are. I mean, one has to kind of, one works all the time with one's sort of own mind and resourcefulness, thinking, imagining, thinking up words and so on. But if you see a professional writer, then they're actually far more, in fact, doing a lot of things, right? They're handling their careers, they're seeing that their books go to print, they're figuring out ways of financing their writing, because it takes years to write. So you do have to kind of figure out a way of earning and getting from, passing each day and the months and the years it takes. But the most valuable lesson, in fact, I think that you can take away from a writer at this point where you are beginning to write your manuscript is that you must show up for work. Right? Just show up and let whatever happen. But show up and things will happen. Things will move forward. Ironically, about the writing process itself, you have to do it. One can offer very little by way of guidance. One cannot tell you how to do it. You have to just do it and sort of figure it out as you go along. But there are, a lot of tips that are floating around these days. Use a writing program, or a sort of write with. Some people like to write by hand. Some people like to write by typewriter, and there are sort of writing is now taught quite widely, particularly creative writing. But really, you can only sort of, there's only so much that one can tell you about how to do it. The important thing is that it has to be done. Well, what can give one can, I guess, as a practicing writer, what I can do is think of a few tips that might be helpful. So, in the last lecture, I talked about making a plan of the book before actually starting it. And of course, sometimes the plan, one might not have a proper, full, detailed plan, but figuring out sort of where things are going to go. It can be flexible and you can change it later on. But if you start with some kind of plan, And if you have given a lot of thought to form and structure, which is really very, very important, and style, then you at least know what you are doing. There is a direction when you start work every day. You know where you are heading. That's one. To make a schedule. Some people like to write in the early mornings, some people like to write late at night, some people like to maintain a kind of schedule like a workday schedule. That's entirely your choice. It might be that you have a day job, in which case you have to make the time at some point to work, either every day or maybe a few days a week. Whatever is possible for you and whatever suits you. But make a schedule and commit to it. If you say you're going to write 2 hours a day or 3 hours a day, then do it. Don't keep putting it off. Don't say that, I will do it tomorrow, not today. This today, there seems to be this problem. No, write every day or write every week or whatever you have figured out, but make sure. If, for instance, you have a job, let's say you are teaching somewhere and every day it's not possible, maybe then you say that when the semester ends or when I have a vacation, that's when I write. But then do it. Don't just make a promise to yourself. Don't let yourself down. Commit to your schedule and stick to it. Exercise to maintain stamina. Now, this is really, really important. So it's not something that seems sort of, obvious, because, writing, usually you're so stationary when you write that one doesn't think one is expending energy. But one is expending a lot of energy. Writing is a very, very laborious task. So I would really, really recommend some form of exercise. You could swim or go for a walk or a run, do yoga, work out in a gym, whatever suits you, stretch, but you must do something. It will really help you, because writing is like running a marathon. You have to do it. Writing a book takes a very, very long time, and one can sort of tire oneself out, because thinking, even though it's a cerebral activity, it is physically exhausting. It really is. You'll find out if you write continuously over time. The next tip, it works for me, but it might not work for you. But I would say minimize distractions. Minimize, for instance, socializing. I know this is a hard thing to do, and perhaps you might not need to do it. But what I find that when you have a lot of other things going on at the same time while you're writing a book, then a lot of energy is expended on these things. On if you have to, for instance, go somewhere, then the traffic, and how it makes you feel, meeting a lot of people and how they make you feel, and dealing with other people's, the kind of energies they bring in, it can be extremely distracting. It's also very sort of disruptive, because what it does is when you're writing a book, even if there's a point at which you're not writing, you're just thinking, you are sort of in a zone. I mean, that's where the best work comes, when you have been able to bring yourself into this sort of little box, where it's just you and that empty page, and there is a relationship established between you. And when you sort of break that to go somewhere, um, to go to an environment which is very different from where you are, then it takes some time to bring yourself back to this space. So you can't control where your mind goes easily, but you can control yourself physically. So if you can try and I at least found it very useful. When I was writing my first book, I made a pact with myself that I would try and not go beyond a kilometer around my house, and it was actually kind of quite useful, because then one was able to minimize those disruptions, and at least keep some control, have some control over how much one was uh, sort of distracting oneself, and stimulating oneself with sort of stimuli that were not that were taking away from that calmer, quiet, more focused attention one was able to give to the book. Okay, so there you are, writing your book as well as you can, focusing, uh, paying attention, and doing the work. Now, another thing that will happen is that many changes will occur along the way. Be prepared for that. You might think that you have it all planned out. You might think that this is how it's going to go, and I'm going to write 1,000 words today. I'm going to write 200 words every day, or whatever it is. I'm going to finish a chapter every week. You might have a plan, and it will be disrupted. It definitely will be disrupted. I mean, if your writing is good and um, is of value, then it will happen that what you thought was good suddenly does not seem so good, and you want to just throw it away. You want to rewrite it all. You want to begin again. You want to, I would say, be prepared for surprises, be adaptable. In fact, I found that I've always written very differently with each book. So, for the very first book I wrote, I think it had quite a few chapters. I think it had some, if I recall right, it started with something like 20 plus chapters. Eventually, what I did was I combined two halves of each chapter, and so eventually it became fewer chapters, maybe 11 or so. But I remember that I had a plan for half the book, and I just started writing. And by the time half was done, the plan for the next half became sort of very clear in my head. So that was kind of quite magical, because things happen as you go along. So maybe what I don't know if it had happened that when I started, I had so much to deal with that I could not make a whole plan. But once some of those things were said, it became easier, and the rest of the book fell into place. So that's one possibility. Um, with my second book, I had a single uniting thread, in the sense that the book was it was a biography, so it was about one person. But because he entered many different areas, it all became very confusing until I decided on a chronological structure, and then things became simpler. But at every step, decisions had to be taken. What tense was I going to use? What are you going to use? The past tense, the present continuous, the past continuous? What are you going to? I had to decide. For instance, was I going to use first names or second names? And then one had to be kind of figure out whether it was going to be, first names would make it. Was it too informal? Would second names make it too formal? All these have an impact on the shape and the tone of the book. And these are not things that you anticipate. In fact, most times, many things will come up that you did not think about. And you just have to be adaptable. But you also, you can't keep switching. You can't say, I want to, so for instance, your tense. You might start writing, well, it has happened that you can write a book in a tense, and then halfway through decide that you're going to change the tense, but then you have to go back and change it all the way through. So you have to kind of figure out all your decisions have to be kind of also think about consistency, tone, how is it changing? Perhaps suddenly something comes up which asks for a lighter tone, but then you have to remember that it should also match with the rest of the book, what went before, what's going to come after. So, so one is constantly, while one is sort of in this calm, focused, ideally, one is trying to achieve that kind of focus and calm. One is also constantly being challenged by these decisions. So one is writing, and as one is writing, one is having to think about making these sort of decisions in one's head, keeping the whole book in mind, keeping all the content, keeping the aim, keeping the size, um, everything. As I said, the tone, very important. Um, so yeah, unlike what we may think, writing is a messy affair. It's an extremely messy affair. Be prepared for, you know, a lot of waste, a lot of waste paper, a lot of crumpled, you know, paper balls flying all over the place, cancel lines. You know, I if I kind of nowadays with the computer, it's easy to sort of clean up the page, but you know, you kind of can see these sort of zigzag lines just cancelling out everything that one has just done, and that is all absolutely fine. Writers rework a lot. David Lodge, we kind of mentioned him earlier. We saw his room earlier, the one with the ergonomically sort of designed chair and um, the nice sort of windows. Now, there was in that room a laser printer, which for him is a very important piece of equipment, he says, because he says he prints out work in progress constantly, and he rereads it and then amends it by hand. And then he edits it on a screen and prints it out again and again. And a single page of a novel, he says, will be redrafted like this at least sort of 10 times, every page. That's the amount of reworking that is done. Um, so do not worry. In fact, welcome mess. Welcome mess, and then know that your job as a writer, that is what one is doing. One is trying to achieve clarity. One is trying to make a nice sort of shape out of all that, out of that kind of puzzle. Earlier, I think it was perhaps in the previous lecture, or the one before that, I showed you a picture of a crime map. I showed you a photograph where you had blocks, you had pages sort of pasted up on a wall, and you had things, sort of lines running from point to point to point, and it looked so messy. And I said, this is a puzzle, and like a detective, you're going to solve it. And really, a writer is in some ways like a detective. You're kind of taking this maze, this kind of mess of stuff that you have collected, and you're trying to give it shape. So reworking is just part of the process. Now, I just for inspiration, I wanted to show you a couple of books on writing that writers have written on writing. This is a book by Stephen King. It was written a year after he had gone through a car accident. And this is a book about writing and his advice to writers on writing a memoir of the craft. So I think it would be quite a wonderful book to kind of look up if you're an aspiring writer. Another book is Zen in the Art of Writing, Essays on Creativity. It's a collection of essays by Ray Bradbury, published in 1990. And again, it's about Bradbury's love of writing. So I think, to have these wonderful writers actually talk about the craft would be kind of inspiring and a very beautiful way to enter the process. So let us assume that the manuscript is written. Yay! That would be kind of wonderful, right? You climb the hill and you come out on the other side, and you have this, this complete sort of work. Well, don't celebrate yet. Read through it. and then put it away for a little bit. Put it away, um, rest, do other things, refresh yourself, and then go back to it. Read it again, but read it without. I imagine that when one is at the end, towards the end of writing a book, one is very impatient. One is eager to finish it. One is cannot wait to kind of. It's almost like wanting to be free of a bar, kind of something that's one is tied up in, and one is tired. But that is not the best time to judge if your book is done and if you've done enough. In fact, that is really a bad time. So a good thing to do is to take a break. Well, finish it, put it aside, take a break, and then go back to it. And believe me that that 10 or 20% of reworking that one will do at that point will make a very, very, very big difference, because it might be very small things that you have left undone, very, very kind of small things that at that point, you kind of were rushing through a part, so you've written a few lines extremely badly. But what happens is that when someone is reading it, it might not appear so bad and glaring to you, because while one is writing so many thousands of words that a few words that are not as good as the other won't sort of jump out at that point. One will just have to kind of keep moving on, soldiering on. But when one has relaxed and one knows that one has actually kind of really gone over that hump, and come out to the other side with this work, one has stayed with the work all that while, and then one is looking at it with a little more kindness to oneself and one's work, then one will find things that need editing that's required, but rewriting that's required, a certain amount of maybe explaining that you might need somewhere, a certain amount of cleaning up, improving the language. That um, that that kind of process at this point of improving the manuscript is really extremely valuable. So don't skip it. Um, there are people who like feedback while they're writing. I don't know if you are one of those people, so that's something that you decide for yourself. Do you like feedback? Or at what point do you like feedback? Do you want feedback halfway through the manuscript, or when you just begun, or later, or after you finished? But be careful with feedback, because opinions are subjective, and one shouldn't get too swayed by feedback. One should use it more as a sounding board, but one should have faith in one's own judgment as well. But as I said, improve it, and improve it until you are really happy with it. Remember this quote that I had pulled up earlier: "Betterment is perpetual labor," by Gawande in Better, a Surgeon's Notes on Performance. Betterment is perpetual labor, and it's really worth it. So yes, as I said, now you have completed a manuscript, and actually completed it with that 10% extra that you should put in. Well, congratulations, it is an achievement, no less than climbing a mountain or running a marathon, maybe more, depending on the scope of the book and how much you have had to put into it, and just your journey writing it. So take a moment to appreciate how far you've come, where you started and where you have arrived. Relax, exult, be happy, and then get prepared for all that still needs to be done, because a book is never done. So first of all, let us look at the elements that you might need to pay attention to, because so you finished the manuscript, but there are still elements that might need to be added. particularly with non-fiction, there are certain kinds of elements that form a necessary part of the package. So you may have in your book, and you may not have. You may have footnotes or endnotes. Now, the notes that I'm referring to here are short explanations added to a text or image. I'm sure, as students, you would be familiar with what these notes are. You sort of see a little number and next to sort of the end of sentence, and you sort of go either below at the bottom of the page if it's an end note, or at the back of the book where I'm sorry, endnotes appear at the end of the document on a separate page, or sometimes at the end of a chapter or section, and footnotes appear at the bottom of the page that contains the sentence they refer to. So there's no real difference. You would choose either depending on what works for your particular work. So that's one thing to remember. So if you have to add footnotes or endnotes, then that's something you will work on. Then the bibliography. Again, depending on the kind of book you have written, you might need to compile a list of books that you have referred to, or academic papers, or other sources. Sometimes people actually also list the interviews they've conducted and so on. That's entirely up to you and whoever's publishing your book. So the bibliography will be a compilation of the sources that you have, the books and documents that you might have referred to. And the way it is, the way you put together the book reference, it could be, it's an the basic format. There are many formats. Whether you put where do you put the name of the author, the year of publication, the edition, and the publisher. That varies. There are several kind of formats, and so there's no point in my kind of it's not as if one is better than the other. Different publishing houses follow different formats, so you just have to know which one is being followed and then apply it accordingly. And then you must provide proper attribution. So whenever you refer to a source, you have to cite your sources correctly to acknowledge their contributions and maintain integrity. Permissions. You might not need permissions, or you might, depending on the data you have used. So for instance, if you have used images, then you will need to get either clearance. I mean, you will need to get permissions from whoever has the copyright to those photographs, or you will need to or you need to buy rights. So that's one thing. If you use a piece of poetry, you might need to get permission for that. If you use a quote from other books, then you might need to get permissions from those publishers or the writers. But this is all some of a lot of you are allowed to quote a certain amount of kind of text without asking for permission if it's it constitutes a fair use. But this is something you will have to kind of, it's a case by case, you'll have to figure it out depending on what it is that you are using. Then captions, again, if you are using photographs, then you will need to provide captions, the style of which will again depend on the publisher and your what you like. So these are some of the things that you have to think of. I mean, a good time to think of it, it may be that you are working on these as you go along, and so by the time you finish the manuscript, you have already given your attention to all these things. But if you haven't, then these are some of the things that some of the things to remember. I think I skipped acknowledgements perhaps. So acknowledgement is also where you kind of thank you thank people, you thank people who helped you along the way. You thank your family. You could thank, well, whoever you need to thank for helping you with the book. So captions, citations, permissions, acknowledgements, photographs, bibliography, footnotes or endnotes. These are things to remember. That would make your package complete, so to speak. But I assume that these are not elements that are unknown to you. I mean, if you worked in a magazine or a newspaper, then you know what captions are. If if you've written academic papers, then you know what footnotes and endnotes are. You know these things. But in the context of popular nonfiction, there is a difference, and let me try and talk a little bit about this. Um, you, as I said, you do need to follow all these rules. You do have to attribute, you do have to name your sources, you do have to thank and take permissions and all that. But um, attribution, notes, bibliography, technical explanations are all important in popular nonfiction because they are a way of establishing the depth of your research, and they provide credibility and show professionalism, right? So we do this because we need to give weight, proper weight to our work, to say that we have done the work required to make this a credible work, a professional work, a thorough work. But on the other hand, since your book is meant for the mainstream, then one has to find a way of lightening the load of all these elements. Um, and because what happens is that footnotes, endnotes, technical explanations, etc., they tend to load the copy. Now, it's one thing if you are reading a niche book, like you're a sociologist reading a sociology text, then you're responding to, in fact, the sort of specialized language in a certain way. Let's say, and you're interested in in cars, then someone is writing about engines and new trends and all that. One is already in knows the grammar of that particular subject, and so it's okay, you can go along with it. But if you're writing for the mainstream, then one cannot, one has to find ways of doing what, and as I said, one can't escape. Sometimes technical explanations are necessary, even in books that are meant for the popular mainstream, sort of mainstream audience. Explanations are necessary, and attributions, all these things are necessary. You do have to cite your source. But there are ways of, some techniques at least, that I can kind of suggest. So one is, if there's sort of clunky explanatory material, then that could be put in an appendix at the back. There's a book called Behave, The Biology of Humans at Our Best and Worst, by the celebrated scientist writer Robert Sapolsky. It's a kind of, it's a book that is an exploration of why humans behave as they do. And what the writer has done is he has kind of made three appendices at the back on neuroscience, the basics of endocrinology, and proteins. Now, what that happens, in fact, when I was reading the book, he kind of comes to a point and he says, well, look here, stop and go and read this thing if you need an explanation for it, and then come back here. Because you will need to know that stuff to come back here. But if you already know it, then proceed. And he does it in this sort of very friendly, warm way. And I'm not a specialist. I have not, I needed the explanation. So I went back, read the appendix, and and then came back to the text. And then it flowed really well, because one went away where the explanation could be slightly technical, and then one came back to where the book sort of flowed in the writer's more sort of regular, kind of more friendly voice. Yes. So, as I said, instead of having clunky things, sort of big blocks of text right in the middle, you can kind of. So here is the book. Okay. So another way of doing it is that you can use notes as part of the reading experience, in the sense that some writers like Ramchandra Guha, William Dalrymple, and Amitav Ghosh, their notes are also kind of very well written. So it's not like you have sort of very good writing in the body of the text, and then you have the notes just giving you the necessary information and doing what they're supposed to do, but they also become part of the reading experience. So you kind of you read the notes with as much sort of enjoyment as the book itself, the text itself that you're reading. So you could make the notes extremely lively, and have that kind of friendly kind of and care with which you write the notes as well. Care towards the writing of them. Then there are other ways of approaching the issue. You could try and avoid notes as much as possible by integrating the explanations into the text. But then you would really have to, I mean, particularly in creative non-fiction, that has to happen, because you can't really, it's sort of not a form where you have notes that much. But if you're going to do that, then you really have to find vivid ways of integrating it in ways that it becomes extremely readable. So you could do it through dialogue. Someone may be explaining the technical part, or you could, you could break up the explanation in bits and pieces, and then peg it onto various bits of statements or bits of the text. Or so anyway, this is sort of, the options are numerous, and one has to find what works best for what you have. Okay, but as I said, in popular nonfiction, you have to think about this. You cannot just put the notes. You have to think about how you're going to make it all work as a piece of mainstream, writing for the mainstream. Captions too. If you include captions in your work, then you can think about making captions chatty and different. But of course, they must follow a consistent style through the book. Oh, you can't have one style, in one part and then another style. You will have to see that the same style is followed through. But captions too can be kind of lively and not necessarily just kind of abrupt and plain. You can think about captions too and what you can do with that. Some writers use symbols or little icons to divide sections. Again, you can sort of, I've seen one book that has a little puzzle to illustrate what is coming next. Now, these can enliven the text, but one has to be very careful, because one has to use this judiciously, because it can also make things a bit too flippant, and one doesn't want that. So use it with care. Photographs, of course, are a great addition depending on the kind of book you're writing. That's up to you. Certain books are really enriched by photographs. Some books really don't need them. In fact, they take away from, if there's very sort of descriptive writing, then perhaps photographs would not be necessarily the kind of thing. Again, just differs depending on what your material is. But remember also that photographs are expensive to kind of, they add to the production cost. So keep that in mind. Acknowledgements that we talked about earlier. It might seem that, it might seem that people don't read the acknowledgements. The acknowledgements are what the author sort of has a little kind of few paragraphs where she or he thanks people who have been helpful. And I just mentioned it earlier. But here what I want to say is that too can be something that you write well. It doesn't have to be sort of, formal, or you can make that too a good piece of writing. In fact, in popular nonfiction, really, every part of a book should be kind of should be animated and jump out. Your contents, we saw earlier a book by Harari, and I showed you the list of contents, which all had sort of chapter titles and things that sort of seemed interesting and showed the writer's perspective. So you have all these sort of things there where you can use your use style to enliven all that. So we're going to continue in the next lecture with some more kind of guidelines for how to finish a manuscript and how to submit it for publishing. So we will talk a little more about these things. But so remember that we have come to a point where we've completed our manuscript and now we are going on to the next stage. So with this we come to the end of lecture 9, which is preparing a manuscript. The course is Appreciating and Writing Popular English Nonfiction Books. Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you again.
Hi, my name is Gillette Sam, and I teach sociology at IIT Kanpur. One of the things you must have noticed if you read or if you talk to people around you is that they often refer to something called globalization, or they often say we live in a global world. What does this mean? Today I'll tell you about how to think about globalization or interpret the word global in a sociological manner. When sociologists refer to globalization, they refer to three things. The first is that that it involves transplanetary processes, which means that something is going on across multiple borders, right? The second is that it involves heightened liquidity and interconnected flows. Now, by liquidity, and this is a term that was coined by the sociologist Zygmunt Bauman, we refer to the increasing interconnectedness of things across the globe, but we also refer to increasing instability across the world, which means that potentially something that is occurring many kilometers away from you actually influences the place that you live in. So if there is a natural disaster happening in one part of the world, maybe that causes people to migrate from that area and they come and settle where you stay. So that is what we mean by liquidity. And of course, when we are talking about liquidity, we are talking about things that are really moving from one place to the other. Now, the third aspect, and this is something that you may not conventionally come across in the way people use globalization, is that of structures. So, let's take an example. Supposing I, as an Indian citizen, wish to visit a foreign country. Let's say I want to go to South Africa. Can I just pick up my bags and hop on the next plane and go to South Africa? Any logical person is going to say, no, wait, you need to have documents such as your passport or visa. Now, this passport or this visa is a representation of the larger structure that governs how people move across borders. So we have things like border control, national security agencies that consider what kind of people are going to move from one place to the other. correct? So, when we think about globalization, an average person typically tends to think about things moving or people moving from place to place. As sociologists, we also consider that there are structures that facilitate or direct this movement across multiple borders.